speaking of greatest hits, this must be the greatest hit of George Galloway's career. My goodness. Rochdale by-election. And we're asking if you're glad to see Galloway back at Westminster. He's been elected as MP for Rochdale, despite being a divisive figure over the years. So, what do you think of it, Sayeeda? So, I woke up this morning, I was quite shocked, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people were expecting George Galloway to win the Rochdale by-election once the Labour Party no longer had a candidate, and once...
Well, they were still on the ballot paper. I thought a lot of people might have missed the whole Labour thing and just vote Labour anyway, but...
No, I think it was such a huge story, and I think because of the backdrop of what's going on in Gaza and the fact that, you know, as the polls were opening, there was this terrible attack on an aid distribution moment when hundreds more lost their lives. I just think against that backdrop, this was going to be a moment for people to say, as often is in by-elections, right, I'm just going to kind of have my say now. And by-elections are really unusual, right? Voter turnout is usually quite low. It's usually a moment for the electorate to say, you know, a plague on all your houses, and they do produce quite odd results.
Well, yeah, but I mean, this one, particularly because of as a backdrop, as you say, Labour's held Rochdale since 2010, and in the last general election won the seat with a majority of nearly 10,000. The by-election was called after the death of Rochdale's MP, Sir Tony Lloyd, who's very much old-school Labour. He died of leukemia on the 17th of January. 11 candidates stood, including Azza Ali, the candidate abandoned by Labour over anti-Semitic comments. Azza Ali had suggested Israel had deliberately relaxed security ahead of the 7th of October attack after warnings of an imminent threat. Let's just have a look then at the results. So you see the dominance of Mr. Galloway. So a couple of other things to point out as well here, actually. So George Galloway, Workers' Party, 12,300. That's nearly 40% of the vote. The guy in second place, David Tully, is just quite an interesting local character. He does a lot of fundraising. He's well-known business person, does a lot for charity. And he just went on Rochdale. And often you get candidates who don't even know which constituency they're in. So he did really well, 1 vote in 5. Then the Conservatives in third place. So they will be quite pleased with that. Labour, as Sayeeda's saying, Labour weren't behind their candidate, so this guy had been essentially vaporised. And then Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrats. Who are we missing? We're missing Reform, who were supposed to be taking lumps out of the Conservatives. But obviously there aren't that many votes on the right to go around in that constituency. The big winner is George Galloway, and the big loser in his eyes, Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. And you will pay a high price for the role that you have played.
So, what do you think of that, Jemma? Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza.
It's complicated, isn't it? I think George Galloway knows what he's doing, and he's quite a divisive figure. At the same time, though, he will be speaking for, you know, many people in terms of looking at the situation in Gaza and feeling incredible disquiet about Starmer's stance, you know, i.e. just sort of seems to be unqualified support for Israel to an extent. I know recently they have been talking about a ceasefire, but it's been a bit pathetic. But that said, there's so many other things as well. Like, for instance, the fact that Reform barely registered. I think it's really interesting when you look at that independent candidate, what he achieved on his own. You know, Reform have been never off the telly, millions of pounds behind them. So that's an interesting thing. I think that now, in the age of social media, George Galloway's never been an MP, and I think all his speeches... Sorry, but in the age of social media.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So I think that because of the kind of character he is...
Right.
All his clips now are going to be, you know, they will be providing a thorn in the side of Starmer that will be quite interesting.
But he's a single-issue guy, in a way, and it's all Middle East, and the question is, if you're in Rochdale, whether at some point you think, I want him to talk about the holes in the road here.
Yeah.
He's not really a local candidate.
No, and listen, he's not going to stand again, and we don't know when next election. No, he's actually said he's going to stand once in Rochdale, which is what he normally usually does in every other constituency. Kind of, you know, the George Galloway train rolls in and then rolls back out again. I think people accept he's not going to deliver anything for Rochdale in the way that we saw in other constituencies that he won in. And if it means that for, whether it's the next 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whenever the election is going to come, if he continuously raises this issue of Gaza, that might be the only positive. The worry I have is at a time when politics is really divisive, when politicians are increasingly using language which pits community against community and is really quite incendiary. And we've just had a whole week of my colleagues, from Lee Anderson to Liz Truss to Paul Scully to any other person that seems to come out and speak. So I can't even bring myself to... There's something about when I say that name, I even seem to choke on it. But, there's something about this terribleness of the language that's coming out of mine. Do we really need another politician in
I don't know whether we can show
who's going to use that kind of language?
I wanted to hear what you thought about the Lee Anderson. Now, I don't know if we got the Lee Anderson clip, because this is what caused all the trouble for him, although he may be revelling in it. And this is where he says that he thinks the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has been taken over by Islamists.
We've got a very cowardly Khan running London. He seems to be letting the not only the Jewish population down, but the whole population of London and Britain as a whole. And I heard the comments earlier you was making about Suella, some of the comments she made earlier this week. And I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country. But what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Storm as well.
What do you think of that?
I mean, that is just such terrible stereotyping and tropes. I mean, the Muslim takeover, the Jewish takeover, these are all the similar forms of racism. And one of the things I really despise
is the way... as well.
Yeah, and this what I really despise is the way in which politics is pitting communities against community, and particularly the Jewish community and the Muslim community. And it's actually one of the reasons why, actually only this week, David Baddiel and I have decided to say, stop talking about us, stop telling us what we think and what our communities think. We are going to speak for ourselves. We are going to have these tough conversations.
You've got this podcast, right?
We've got this podcast called A Muslim and a Jew Go There, which is all about going there and having the really difficult conversations that most people are saying, well, avoid that, or politicians are ratcheting it up for their own political ends. And I think it's really important for us to have very frank, honest conversations in which we disagree.
No, understood. But you may
create a safe space
to have it. Sure, but you may both be quite liberal, and it's when you get people on the extremes talking that it gets... Because I'm just trying to imagine, Jemma, Lee Anderson in a room with George Galloway. Can you... I don't think it would... would it get physical?
And I agree. Everything needs to be ratcheted down at the moment. And it's, we're living in horrible, horrible times. Where is the leadership? And presiding over all of this is Sunak. And it disgusts me that Suella Braverman got away with the piece that actually she wrote in the Telegraph, which kicked off Lee Anderson's foul comments. So it sort of stemmed from her. And he doesn't contain anything. And he doesn't manage anything.
Now. She's been fired already. So what do you do? Like Liz Truss, you can't do much short of deselecting her.
I also feel like Rochdale haven't been served very well. If you look at all the candidates, like, Labour's disaster, that was a mistake. So they essentially didn't have a Labour choice.
Do you think so? Because I'm going conspiracy theory on it. I think it's very convenient for Labour not to be in that election, because otherwise, what Starmer doesn't want is Starmer's party versus Galloway. So I almost wonder whether they were looking for an excuse to pull their guy.
Well, look, you could say that, but also what Azhar Ali said meant that there was no way that you were going to be able to let him stand as the Labour candidate, because it was an obvious anti-Semitic trope. However, I don't think that him losing the Labour whip during the election was bad for Starmer, because I think even if he had stood as the Labour candidate, Galloway would have won.
He would have lost,
They're rooting out anti-Semitism, but you've got to root out Islamophobia as well.
After the break, we'll keep talking about this. Are you celebrating George Galloway's victory? What do you think when you saw it, you heard about it? Give us a call now, 0207 862 2222. We'll be back with you in a moment. First, let's talk more about the by-election in Rochdale and the new MP for Rochdale, George Galloway. We're asking if you're pleased he's back at Westminster. My goodness, this guy has had a colourful career. So let's go back in the day. So, George, this is not the first time we have heard the name George Galloway. And we'll just take you through what I would call here the years before the cat. I'll explain in a moment. So, born in 1954, there he is, in an attic in a slum tenement in the Irish quarter of Dundee, known as Tipperary. And rebellious from an early age, showed signs of a rebellious streak when he defied his head teacher's orders to shave off his moustache. He was big with the Scottish Labour, became a member of their executive at 20, and then a priest denounced him for living in sin with his future wives. There's a bit of controversy. But have a look at this. Who's that there standing next to him? Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon, Pat Kane on the right. So, in his 20s, he became associated with the foreign causes that would later shape his career. So, for example, this is going back. He backed Dundee City Council flying the Palestinian flag. He was involved in the city being twinned with a town in the West Bank in 1980. He then, this is bizarre, he became General Secretary of the charity War on Want, gave a press conference in which, out of the blue, he admitted to having sex with 2 women at a conference on famine in Athens. And that sort of blew him up, really. His personal life was thrown into chaos. But then he came back and became an MP. Didn't last long. He was accused of selling out British troops by denouncing Tony Blair's wars, and he was thrown out of Labour. He called British troops wolves, and he said Arab countries should fight the Allies. Now we come to the cat. This is the key moment. He's thrown out of Labour by Tony Blair. What's he going to do? He goes on Big Brother.
Good pussycat, yes. Good pussycat. That's squammy. Delicious.
So that's him and Rula Lenska on Big Brother. And everyone said, oh my goodness, no one can ever recover from that. That led the way for people like Matt Hancock and Nadine Dorries to go on these reality TV programs. But he wasn't finished. He then became MP, big protest vote, pro-Muslim protest vote in Bethnal Green and Bow. He became MP again in Bradford West. He had a tilt at some other seats, didn't win them. And now he's back. And that's a very truncated version of his career. I mean, I suppose arguably we need these people in politics, don't we?
Do we?
Well, this guy exists in 3 dimensions. It's like Farage. You may disagree with him.
I was just going to say that. He's like the mirror opposite of Farage.
Indeed.
And they're good to kind of start political debate. But I think right now, at this moment in time, when there are so many issues around toxicity in politics, I just think we need calm heads. We need boring, steady politics. I'm sick of all this kind of personality.
But haven't we ended up where we are because we had very boring politics under Blair Brown?
Take me back to those days.
And, well, yeah, sure,
Blair
maybe,
Brown,
and Cameron maybe as well. And somehow a lot of people felt missed out. And then, by the way, there was a massive bankers' crisis and they were tapped on the shoulder and asked for money to bail out the banks. So that's what boring did for us.
Yeah, I long for boring. But and George Galloway's actually had more electoral success than Farage. Right?
He has.
But,
well, hang on a minute. Farage has changed the history of this country without being elected.
He's an incredible campaigner.
Right.
Yeah.
He could walk into a seat somewhere if he, you know.
Yeah. If he could be bothered.
Well, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Are you pleased he's back or not?
The thing is, I think that another reason that he's had success in Rochdale, apart from sort of the strange candidates and all the rest of the problems there, is because the current leadership aren't listening to the majority who feel incredibly worried about the Israeli government and what's happening in Gaza. I think I saw a poll the other day saying something like 87% of people polled, are completely sort of for a ceasefire.
Yeah.
So the door has been opened to George Galloway.
You mentioned this, and I don't know if we've got footage of this awful thing yesterday in Gaza, but you mentioned it, Sayeeda, at the very start, which almost was, maybe it worked in Galloway's favour, I don't know. So what you've got here is a group of people who were trying to access aid, and I think there was an aerial shot by the Israeli army where they show everyone congregating around these aid trucks, and then it seems shots were fired, allegedly at the crowd, maybe into the air. There was some sort of panic, and at least 112 Palestinians are said to have been killed, 760 injured, and it might be that the trucks in the middle with all the aid simply had to drive away and drove over everybody.
I mean, this is tragic.
Terrible.
This is such a horrific act, and I am appalled at the way in which the Israeli government is trying to justify this. You cannot put a community of Palestinians in an enclosed area, not allow aid trucks in, and there are, by the way, miles and miles of aid trucks on the border of Israel, and Israel are simply not allowing them to come in. The food is there. You effectively put a community under starvation London. We've had so many reports, including from the World Health Organization, to say this is a group of people who are on the brink of famine, then taking very limited amount of food. People quite rightly then panic and go towards that food, and then you effectively start shooting at them. I mean, it is just the most
Susan, you're a Conservative saying that. Labour aren't saying that. That what Sayeeda's just said. Labour are not really saying that.
Yeah, which is really problematic.
And so they've got some of their voters care very strongly about this. Now, it's interesting that Labour didn't have a candidate in this, because if they had, he might have lost anyway, as you said earlier. Ian is in North Ayrshire. Hi, Ian.
Hello, good morning.
Are you pleased that Galloway is back?
No, not at all. He's always been a firebrand. He's always been a loose cannon, stemming from his early days in the Labour Party. But the point is, every night we're getting saturated with pictures, and some too bloody to go on domestic television, of Palestinians getting murdered on a regular basis. It's tiresome now. He's always been a supporter, so he's harnessed the local apathy with Labour and Tory voters, and he's brought this issue into Parliament through his election. Now, what we should...
Is that good, though, Ian? Because when you say tiresome, you sound like it doesn't matter, but it matters a lot.
It matters more than a Labour MP or a Tory losing their seat in the election.
Okay, thanks, Ian.
Let me finish, please.
Quickly, yeah.
The two main parties are only interested in power. The way George has come over is interested in people.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I was going to say, looking at his anti-Semitic comments and so on, he tweeted in 2019 after an FA Cup final, "Congratulations to the great people of Liverpool, to the memory of the socialist miner Bill Shankly, to the fallen 96, that's a Hillsborough reference, to those who fought for justice in them, and to the Liverpool Dockers." And then this is an FA Cup final victory over Spurs. He then adds, "No Israel flags on the cup." A reference to the fact that a lot of Spurs fans have Jewish background, I guess, from North London. And
it's this casual racism. You know, it really is getting... I keep coming back to this. The weaponization of anti-Jewish racism, the weaponization of anti-Muslim racism is appalling. We've got to now call it out equally, and we've got to say we will not allow you to stigmatize and stereotype. And the other thing that I find really disturbing at the moment is this: people who have a long history of anti-Semitism will use the word Zionism as a cover for meaning Jews. And people with a long history of anti-Muslim racism and Islamophobia will use the cover of the word Islamism as a way of meaning Muslims. And I just think all this clever kind of dancing that's going on, in the end, it's racism. OK, we'll talk a bit more about this after the break and take more of your calls. Are you celebrating George Galloway's victory, or are you angry about it? 0207 862 2222. See you shortly. Sayeeda and Jemma are with us this morning. We're asking later if we should ban booze on flights, but more calls on whether you are celebrating George Galloway's victory at the Rochdale by-election or you're appalled by it. Let's talk to Joe in Oxfordshire. Hi, Joe.
Hello there.
Sorry to keep you waiting. What's your reaction?
Yes, I am celebrating George Galloway's victory. I think it's about time that the Muslim people of most areas of Britain should have a voice. The diatribe that's coming out from the media, the right-wing nut jobs, they've really... I mean, it's really, really bad. I know that Israel...
But when you say the Muslim people need a voice, George Galloway is on an extreme of opinion. He doesn't speak for all Muslims, does he?
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that, do we? I don't think he's extreme at all. Not at all.
For me.
Sayeeda says he doesn't speak for her.
Joe, I understand your concern about the issues that he raises, but I would say this to you, that he is not the voice of British Muslims. That's not the voice British Muslims need. British Muslims...
I really don't know that. I'm sorry, but you cannot speak, nor can I speak for the majority of Muslims. But what I will
I can speak for a Muslim, though, Joe.
I know you are, but you don't know every Muslim in the country, do you?
But Joe, but you were suggesting that George Galloway is now the voice of Muslims in Britain, and Sayeeda's just saying no, he's not.
It's about time they had a voice. All we heard is how Israel are so hard done by, they have a right to defend themselves. Palestinians have been living in an open prison for decades. And the right-wing nut jobs keep driving it home on all the right-wing nut job channels, Talk TV, GB News.
Yeah, okay, all right. We keep getting people referred to GB. All right, so I hear you, Joe. So basically what you're saying is it's good that Galloway's in Westminster.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry if I'm in the minority and it goes against the grain.
It's fine. Thank you for talking this. We want to hear all opinions. Thank you. Roxana is in Rochdale itself. Hi, Roxana.
Hi, Jeremy. How are you? You all okay?
I'm fine. Were you voting yesterday?
I did. I voted my constituent that you're discussing.
So you voted for Mr. Galloway. Are you pleased he won?
Of course. Yes, of course. So the particular reason that I voted, he was the only candidate that we have had who actually speaks for the masses within Rochdale. Now, what I found through the media before the election, after the election, is, it's a Muslim vote. It's 30% Muslims, etc. Excuse me, Muslims only are 30% of Rochdalians. There is a remaining group of individuals who've also voted. This is not just a vote for our foreign policy. This is a vote for our national policies as such. We in the northern towns have not been listened to. We've never had our point. I mean, most recently...
You may be right about that, but then George Galloway, whether he seems to be just on a one-track thing, though, Roxana, which is to do, as he said himself, it's to do with Gaza.
Other issues were discussed. No, there were other issues which were discussed. Yeah, like our markets, our regeneration within Rochdale, the health costs, the waiting list as such. And then we have Miss Warsi. No disrespect to Miss Warsi. She's been in the Conservative Party for such a large period of time. She keeps making this discussion about it being divisive. We are separating communities, etc. Please, let's not use that rhetoric because that's pandering to Westminster. And at the end of the day, we're not pandering to Westminster. We, the constituents of Rochdale and in the northern towns, are absolutely saddened that there is no voice for
All right,
us.
well, listen, you might not disagree with that.
I don't disagree. Roxana, I feel what you're feeling. I understand how angry Rochdale was, both with the government and also with the way in which the two mainstream parties had not addressed the issue of what was happening in Palestine. I get that. I think where I disagree with you is I don't think the answer to that is George.
Let's just hear from, thank you, Roxana. William, not in Rochdale, Renfrewshire. William, are you pleased he's back?
Yes, I'm very pleased he's back.
Was he an MP? He was MP for Glasgow Hillhead the first time he had a seat, wasn't he? So that.
Yes. Look, Jeremy, I'm not totally in agreement with everything that George Galloway says, but remember, these two women who spoke before have probably hit it in the nail. We're in a situation where the media that are criticising George Galloway for divisiveness. Now, in the last few months, the amount of divisive comments for both parties, they've done a big enough job of being divisive in this country than George Galloway ever did. And it's great to hear somebody speaking out. We've had too much propaganda. We've got journalists who are not allowed into Gaza to see actually what's happening. And you're talking about free and democratic country. You and others should be hammering these people to make them realise that Britain will not stand and watch war crimes. And what Israel was doing is state terrorism. You might have heard of that. And just remember, before you cut me off...
No, I'm not. Listen, you're allowed to say all this. I don't know why you think you're going to get cut off. Go on.
Right. Mr Mandela, Mr Gandhi were classed as terrorists way back. What are they now? And if we when we had a conflict with IRA in Ireland, if we went into the areas where we knew they were, bombed, gassed them, you name it, tanks, what would the standing of Britain be today?
No, I understand. Listen, I think what's happening here is there are so many people who feel so seized with the brutality of what's going on, and they look at Westminster, and the Conservatives don't really say it, and Labour don't really say it, and the Lib Dem, and they're stuck. And so that's why in Rochdale, the second place wasn't even a main party. It was a guy who's basically a local campaigner.
Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it, really?
It is, and it is Labour's biggest misstep, I think. I don't think they've read the room. Obviously, what happened on October 7th, we've all said it 1,000 times, it was awful. And those poor hostages, if there are any left, of course we want to see them returned. But this idea that the Israeli government are, not perpetuating war crimes. We can see it. We live in a day and age where we've got phones. That drone footage of what happened with those aid trucks and those poor human beings who are starving to death, trying to get flour, and then they were just attacked.
If our friend Angela Epstein was here, she would say, look, you haven't mentioned the hostages. The hostages are how this started, the attack of October the 7th.
That's why I did, because it is important.
So all of that is in the mix as well. Shelley in Newcastle, hi. Let's go back to George. Gorgeous George, as he used to be called. Are you pleased he's been elected?
No, I think it's shocking, and I can't believe more people aren't calling him an anti-Semite like they call Lee Anderson and Suella Braverman. Because he's gone in. It's a shame the man that came in second didn't come in, because he was all for Rochdale. It's a very poor area. He's in Israel by saying the people weren't raped, babies weren't killed and everything. He's terrible. I mean, we've got things going on in Yemen and Ukraine, and yet this is being fought on a foreign country when it should be fought on that, isn't it? And can I just say... Can I just say something? They keep going on about Israel war crimes. That apparently yesterday, they're trying to say they shot all these people. Apparently they were crushed. You've got Hamas putting all this propaganda out. No,
we made that point. I was going to say that if Galloway had been Prime Minister instead of Tony Blair, we wouldn't have gone to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, so you would have had less conflict, arguably, would you not?
Well, that was a disgrace anyway, wasn't it? It's well known it was a disgrace.
But I'm just saying I mean, that would be a point in Galloway's favour, arguably, wouldn't it? Because he was very much against those wars and he voted against them. Thank you, Shelley. Thanks for all your calls. My goodness. So it's Galloway's first day as an MP, having been one, I think, in 3 other constituencies previously. Later we'll ask, is it time to ditch old...